Hi everybody, I'm Scott Poynton and welcome to Daniel Klein, The Human Connection, another QE podcast. Daniel is the founder of the Perennial Plate. He describes the Perennial Plate as a documentary series of short films about sustainable food from around the world, sustainable food being a very broad term. He says that at the end of the day, they're really stories about people and making a human connection between where our food comes from and where it arrives on our plate or at the grocery store. I've watched a number of the Perennial Plate films and I find each and every one of them intriguing and inspiring. I love how Daniel, his wife Mira, and their colleague Hunter, together the Perennial Plate team, create films that show with great care and I'd say great love, the intimacies behind the lives of the people behind our food. In this podcast, Daniel speaks about creating a politics of humanity, compassion, and of care for the planet, and I feel very strongly that this is indeed what he and the Perennial Plate team are achieving. It's clearly Daniel's vocation, and he's living it through the beauty of his films. Today, I'm speaking to Daniel Klein, and Daniel is the founder of the Perennial Plate. How are you, Daniel?
Very well, thanks.
How's it going in Minneapolis? How's the weather over there?
It's rainy. It's the start of spring, so things are turning green finally.
Very good.
Nice.
I was in Minneapolis not long ago, actually, and it hadn't quite got to that point yet, but people told me that when it did, it was very beautiful.
Yeah, everyone comes outside when it gets above freezing and goes out in nature, and we very much embrace the seasons here because we have such a long winter. Yeah. When it does get nice, people really become part of it.
People get out in there. So, Daniel, if you can, tell me about the Perennial Plate. What do you guys do?
The Perennial Plate is a documentary series, what we like to call it. Could be called a web series. But over the last 7 years, we've been creating short films about sustainable food around the world. Sustainable food being a very broad term. At the end of the day, they're really stories about people and making a human connection between where our food comes from and when it arrives at our plate or at the grocery store. So my wife and I started in Minnesota in 2009, making one short film a week for 52 weeks. So a short film every week for a year around Minnesota. I had lived in New York and lived abroad for a long time and had come back to where I was born and wanted to get to know my home state again. And so these films helped me to drive around Minnesota and meet fishermen and wild racers and foragers and hunters and get to know the state where I was from. And it was the early days of web video, and so it did quite well initially. And after the 52 weeks, we decided to try the similar thing around the U.S. And so we we were loaned a car, and we road tripped around the U.S. It did 23,000 miles around the U.S. and another 52 films, one a week for a year.
One film a week. That must be hard work.
Yeah, particularly going around the U.S., it was really, really hard. I wouldn't suggest it to anyone.
Yeah,
because you're constantly planning the next shoot and editing and filming. So we developed a strategy actually where my wife Mira would drive, and I had my 17-inch laptop, headphones plugged in, and a portable hard drive, editing while we drove.
Sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, it was intense. And it was a bit of a mistake, actually, because it ended up being that I would have to spend a day or two a week kind of in the hotel room or in the side room of wherever we were staying, just editing instead of being out more and exploring and engaging with the places that we were in.
Yeah.
So the next season, we came to do it around the world, went to 12 different countries, and there we didn't do any editing while in country because we wanted to focus on actually experiencing the place. So we changed it to film every 2 weeks instead, and that really gave us a lot more time to engage in a place.
To really get to know where you were and the people you were with.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what a shame would it be to be traveling in India and spend half the time in the hotel room editing.
Yeah, when you're thinking about editing when you're with the people that are in front of you, bit of a distraction.
Yeah, I mean, there is a thing as a filmmaker when filming, you always are editing a little bit in your head in a non-distracting way, just so you know what kind of stuff you need to get in order to complete a film, the questions that you need to ask, You have to be thinking about, okay, they said something about this. What kind of visuals can I use to best portray that? So there is an editing process going on always, but not the actual physical act of sitting in a dark room in front of a computer hours and hours.
Bit soul destroying.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah.
It can be. But the rewards are great.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the rewards, I mean, you and Mira have both won James Beard Awards. Now, when I looked at your website and saw that, I'd never heard of a James Beard Award, so I quickly looked up Google, and that says that these are considered the Oscars of food. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. What were the awards for, mate?
So the James Beard Awards, in the U.S. are kind of the main food awards. So restaurants get these accolades, and it can be very good for their business. And they also do it for food journalism. So they have categories for best cookbook, best article, and also they do it with the amount of video online. They now have a web series kind of category. So we won 2 years in a row for that, and also got nominated another year. And it's just, it's just nice to be recognized by the industry, and it gets a little bit of a stamp of credibility. Awards are mostly for that, in my opinion, as much as we love them. It doesn't necessarily get more people to watch your films. It's more about, in order to fund a series like the Perennial Plate, it doesn't just come from what we're doing. We do a lot of side projects and work for various organizations or food companies or different companies to make this kind of lifestyle possible. And so having that accolade and that award goes a long way to say, okay, these guys are legitimate, especially when we were starting out.
Yeah. And you've been nominated for a couple of Emmys as well?
Yeah, Mira, we made a PBS show, a 13-part series. There was a relaunch of a show that previously existed in the U.S. Someone reached out to us after seeing our show to make it. And Mira, my wife, who had never done any stop motion or any kind of graphics before, made these cool stop motion intros to all the segments of the show and the intro to the whole show in general. And so that was what was nominated for the Emmy, is her creative use of cutouts and various things put into motion. And that really it's wonderful, because that got her started down a path of graphics, and now she's kind of embraced that and all of that animation, graphics, etc. for our series. So
where do your shows appear, mate? I mean, they're online. They're on your own website, but do they appear anywhere else? And what sort of feedback do you get from the shows? I see having visited your site, I see there's people commenting and things like this, but where does the feedback come? Where do you get that obviously through the awards, but I guess it comes with people wanting to work with you. Yeah, so, I mean, we put the shows out primarily, first and foremost, on our website, the Perennial Plate. And then we also put it out on Facebook. We put it out through a partner channel, Taste Made, on YouTube. And we also have some media partners like The Atlantic, who will put out our films as well. So across those platforms, you get a fair number of comments. So that is great. And Facebook is, where a lot of people are watching a huge amount of content. And so we do get the most views and the most comments and the most shares, et cetera, now from that platform. Although it can be frustrating because people have such short attention spans, and our films are not necessarily designed for the 30-second watch. They're 5 or 10 minutes long. More thoughtful. Yeah, but quite interesting, actually. We had been creating short versions for Facebook because we thought it would get people to watch more. And around the time of the election, when I was feeling frustrated, the recent U.S. election, when I was feeling frustrated with the way media was working, we decided to not make any short versions and put out these longer things. And people were actually more receptive to it on Facebook, watching more and longer. And people appreciated the quality and the length of the content in a way because that doesn't really exist as much on that platform. No, everything's 1 or 2 minutes, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. And so it was nice to see people, spending 4 or 5 or 20 minutes on a film. So we get a lot of, we get feedback from that. And it always feels good when different news websites or different organizations choose to repost or write articles about some of the stuff that we've created. That's nice feedback for us. But we just want people to watch it and think a little bit. That's kind of the premise of the series, is to get people talking and thinking about where their food comes from. So we don't have a full agenda. It's more about opening up a dialogue and telling these inspiring or interesting perspectives that might get people to think a little differently. Well, I'm going to come back to that later because I have watched a lot of your movies in the last day or so as we prepared for the discussion. I had watched some in the past, but I've had an intense look at your site in the last day or so, and I want to come back to that. But look, can you tell me about yourself? Tell me about your journey, and also, if you can, Mira's journey to the Perennial Plate. You know, where did you grow up, and what were the influences on you both as children that saw? I mean, you moved into cooking and now filmmaking, and Mira has moved into filmmaking. Can you share with us the story of your own life a little bit, and what's the Daniel Klein and the Mira Fine story to the Perennial Plate?
Sure. So I mean, I had a really wonderful childhood. I was born in Minnesota, but then moved to Singapore at 4, and I think that is really where the love of food started. As you, I'm sure, know, Singapore has an incredible culinary landscape, and so at 5, I was eating chili crab.
Right. It's such a crossroads, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. You have the India and Malaysia and Thailand all kind of influencing the food there.
China as well, of course.
And of course, China.
Yeah. And not to mention a touch of the British from the past, perhaps.
Right.
A little bit of it still there.
Yeah. Well, the chili crab, you're dipping the white bread into it. That has to be
right.
The British part of it, I'm guessing. So from an early age, food was always an important part of my family's life, having dinner together every night. We never went out to eat. We went out to eat all the time in Singapore, and then we moved to England, where it was not quite as much of a joy to go out to eat. And so my mom really started cooking then. And never, kids are picky, very picky these days. And I never remember disliking anything except for zucchini.
Right. What about broccoli?
Yeah, I like broccoli. I did.
The green veggies.
Yeah, the green veggies were fine, except for zucchini. I think it's because my mom grew it in the garden, and there's always too much of it.
Right.
And so it was in too many meals. And then my parents put a real preference on travel above material things. So they, took every opportunity to, living in England or living in Singapore, to travel that area. And, our school vacations were always to somewhere very interesting, like Morocco or Nepal. Travel and adventure was key to them. So I think that got in our bones. And I went to university at NYU from leaving the UK, going to New York City, and I had an independent study in social movements in Latin America and New York City. So I was kind of studying unions and revolution and kind of social change, political and social change. And then a key thing happened, which was right out of college. I was going to move to Bolivia to work on a project, and my brother came to me and said, "Do you want to go travel across Africa with me and make a film?" And
sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it was intriguing, and I kind of said, "Well, yeah, but we have to make a film that is important." So
not just here I am on the pyramids or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So we discussed, and it was with my cousin and both my brothers and my cousin. We kind of discussed what we could address in Africa that wouldn't seem strange for some white males to be talking about. Right. And so the issue of foreign aid came up, because that is kind of what growing up and in the news and is so often what is talked about is the poverty and the so-called help that is given to African countries. And so we decided to kind of look into what the impact of foreign aid was in Africa, in East Africa. And so we traveled from Cairo to Cape Town overland on public transport over a 6-month period, filming stories of different individuals and how their lives have been impacted positively or negatively by foreign aid.
And where did this come from with your brother? Was he interested in filmmaking? Or he was interested in traveling? Or where did this come from, this idea for the making of film?
My brother did, I think his major or minor at university was film. So he did have some background in it. But we were all pretty pretty inexperienced. We didn't know a lot about filmmaking, and we just kind of started from scratch and started filming. And over the course of that 6-month journey, we did get much better, but the first couple of months of footage was almost unusable.
No editing could save it.
No editing could really save it. And so we proceeded to actually spend a year or maybe 2 years trying to piece this film together. It's a long, arduous process where the democratic way of editing between three brothers and a cousin didn't make a lot of sense.
Fertile ground for a lot of heated discussion.
Yes, there was. Cut
this bit out. No, leave that bit in. I love that bit.
Or just like, that's not what the movie's about. It's about, there was it was a challenging process, but also very rewarding. Right. Between learning how to film across a very, a difficult place to film, and then taking 300 hours and trying to pare it down to 80 minutes was definitely a learning process. And eventually we did come up with a cut of the film, and we got distribution for it, but it was a frustrating process. It took a really long time to get it out there as well and to share it. And we, go through the whole film festival process, and it was just very long,
Torture.
And so, it kind of, that ended up really influencing, the whole thing ended up influencing me in a few ways. We saw a lot of failure of foreign aid, the concept of just helping. There is emergency stuff, which obviously is needed, but there's also the way that the whole system works, which appears to be both perpetuating problems and, is so dependent on where the money is coming from, that projects just end up shifting and changing and never being really what is needed, even though people on the ground might know what is needed. So it made me think that I really should do what I love doing while keeping the world in mind, So doing what you love in a responsible way. While I was editing the film, I started cooking in restaurants in New York City, just to pay for, you don't get paid to edit an independent film that you create with your brothers.
No.
So I had to find a way to live in New York and pay rent and eat.
Of course, there's such a big food scene in New York, of course, isn't there? So plenty of opportunity.
And so I got my first real cooking job. I learned some cooking from my mom, but I got my first real cooking job at a Thomas Keller restaurant. Thomas Keller is a very, maybe the most famous or well-respected chef in the United States. His restaurants, the French Laundry and Per Se and Bouchon, and I worked at one of the Bouchon restaurants. And that got me really excited about food. And so after the film was done, and actually while it was still being edited and we were doing film festivals, I started cooking and traveling to different parts of the world to learn about food. Went to India for a couple months, went to France for a month, went to Spain for 6 months, and kind of training at different restaurants, and then in New York working at restaurants as well. And that was really a great learning period for me, and I loved cooking, but also found a fair amount of dissatisfaction with the kind of restaurants that I was working with, which were made mostly for rich people. As wonderful as they were, and as how much art and time and beautiful food was being created, it did seem a little focused on that. So I decided that maybe I'd move back to Minnesota, where I was born, to get to know it again and maybe open a restaurant there. And so I moved back to Minnesota and looked into opening a restaurant, and kind of went down that path for a little while, but also doing soul searching during that period and kind of thinking about whether or not I wanted to spend the next 10 years of my life in debt with and slaving over the stove, and just was reassessing and thinking and kind of decided one day that maybe I wouldn't do that, and why not just try an experiment of doing actually a pilot for a TV show, because I was interested in local food at that time and responsible eating. And Minnesota is such a cold place. It seemed like a interesting location to explore the challenges of local eating. So I started making a pilot for a TV show.
When was this, mate? What year was that?
This was in 2009.
2009. So It's just interesting, this idea of responsible eating. I imagine, could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, that that was probably pretty early to be looking at this whole question of responsible eating. I think it's coming in people's minds now, but back in 2009, I don't know Minnesota well enough. I suspect in many places of the world, people weren't thinking about where their food was coming from and how it was sustainably produced at that stage. Did you find that, or was there already a movement there in Minnesota for it?
In Minnesota, there was a movement. I mean, you're right that it was not the hot topic that it is now, or became, where everything was natural or artisan. It's definitely a different time for food. However, Minnesota happens to have an amazing co-op culture. So Minnesota is populated. A lot of the immigrants are Scandinavian, who also have co-op culture.
Right.
And so we have a really vibrant food culture here, with a lot of local food coming from southern Minnesota and Wisconsin. And so our grocery stores, our co-op grocery stores, are a big part of the culture, and good food is a huge part of that. So whenever I travel around the U.S. or even around the world, it's always actually amazing to come home to Minnesota and see how great our food is here.
Great.
Our food is in the availability of high quality, fresh, organic produce from Minnesota or Wisconsin.
From local areas.
It's really quite incredible. And there were restaurants that were embracing that for many years here in Minnesota. Part of the reason why I didn't feel as much a need to open a restaurant was because of that, and why it made more sense to tell stories. But when I was thinking about the pilot, I was also thinking about how long it took to get distribution, et cetera, for the film that we had made. And a friend suggested putting it out, or I showed him a cut, and he said that these little segments within the pilot really worked as individual stories, and why not try putting it out online? And so I think I jumped from the idea of putting out a couple of things online to challenging myself to those 52 films in 52 weeks,
right
away, and just
you went for it. You jumped in both feet, mate.
Yeah, exactly, and haven't really stopped since.
Listening to a QE podcast with Scott Poynton. Read about this episode and listen back to more QE podcasts at scottpoynton.com.
The series was, a way of combining the activism from my university years with the cooking that I had learned while editing, and the filmmaking that I had learned on that initial movie. So it was really a way of merging the interests that I had into one thing, and doing something that I would be fascinated by,
And when did that start? So 2009. So your first project was, with the 52 weeks. That was 2010, or?
Yeah. So I started filming in 2009 and got a few episodes in the bag. The first episode was about Thanksgiving turkey.
Right. So end of November, right?
November, and then didn't release it until February. I think maybe started a Kickstarter in February of 2010, and then started from there and went for a year.
Yeah. Now you mentioned Kickstarter. I know you mentioned on your website that you've had a couple of Kickstarter campaigns in the past to get the Perennial Plate up and running. I mean, they've been pretty successful, and I think you've probably found yourself in, maybe not rare, but I think a desired position for a filmmaker, that your movies are free from sponsorship and advertising as such. You're free to make the movies that you want to make. I mean, that must be really rewarding and great freedom for you.
It is rewarding. It is a constant struggle to make that happen. Mm-hmm. With anything, money is always an issue. So we're always looking for ways to fund our films. And we do have sponsorship that they just don't happen at the start of the films. They happen at the end of the films. So we have some kind of guidelines where we need to maintain creative control, and where our supporters, where it's not, we don't like to have that 30-second like roll ahead of our films where it's an advertisement for something. I've had stuff on YouTube where before I stopped taking advertising out completely, where there's like a ad for microwave pizza before a film about making your own bread or something like that.
Terrific.
It's quite ironic. So it's a constant challenge. We do need to find people to pay for these films, and so right now, like, we've been working with tourism boards, and there's a lot of discussion about how to make sure that we're putting out films that are true to ourselves and maintain integrity of the mission of the films, while also satisfying something that somebody else wants and wants to pay for, And we have found that it's quite successful with tourism boards, in the sense that, like, what we are exploring is people, culture, and food. And those are huge reasons why people travel and want to go to a place. So we kind of express this idea that, like, if we tell really true and good stories that are real, warts and all, that is more of an advertisement for a place than any kind of, glossy thing that you could potentially put out.
I agree with you. Now, look, along the way of that journey, you've met Mira. So tell me the story of how you met Mira, and how you guys have come to work together on the Perennial Plate.
Yeah, so Mira and I met in a cheese shop in Minneapolis.
A cheese shop?
In a cheese shop, yeah.
Was she working there, or both customers?
She was working there. We'd both lived in New York for a number of years, and didn't know each other in New York. She moved back to Minnesota about a year before I did, and started working in this cheese shop. And I went in to do a little side job of making charcuterie at the cheese shop. One day a week I would go in there. So we met the first time that I went in to ask about the job. And shortly after that, we started dating. And I was kind of patching together. When this series started, when Perennial Plate started, I was getting random people, my cousin, my brother, to hold the camera while I did some cooking. It used to be a bit more of a cooking and food-centric show, and now it's more of a people-centric show. And so one day I had Mira hold the camera, and she did a really good job. And I obviously liked her, so I kind of kept asking her.
Asked her again.
More and more to come along on these little trips with me throughout Minnesota, and so she became, kind of had to drag her along, But then when the season in Minnesota started and the idea for going around the U.S. came up, then I really didn't want to go do that alone.
And not with your brother, really. Come on. When you could have taken Mira.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Go with brothers and my cousin, or go with my girlfriend. Tough decision.
Tough decision, yeah. Exactly.
That being said, the trip with my brothers and my cousin was one of the best times of my entire life.
I can imagine, yeah.
When you're traveling and you're engaging in society with people and doing something that you feel is important with people you love, it's really, touches all... checks all the boxes of satisfying, rewarding experience. And the trip around the U.S. was similar in that way. Kind of energized to be doing what you consider to be important work with someone you love, traveling and meeting people every day and having a new experience every day. It was incredible. And so she came along for that, and she wasn't editing yet at that point. So it's kind of a slow process of bringing into it. It was really when we started going around the world that Mira became like a full team member and was, filming and editing and organizing all the stories and becoming, a full partnership. And so we've spent a lot of time together. When you travel with somebody, it's like getting to know somebody in hyper speed. And you have to face a lot of decisions, and working together face a lot of decisions. So it's really built up our relationship very fast and strong. And so because we met in the cheese shop, when we were I asked her to marry me in a Parmesan cheese cave.
Good on you.
To continue on that theme. And she loves, as everyone should, love Parmesan cheese. It's, incredible. And so it was a pretty wonderful moment. And right afterwards, the cheesemaker in his overalls and his plastic overalls for making cheese, or whatever those are called, came bursting in and with some flowers and in Italian saying, congratulations. It was
terrific. Lucky she said yes, mate.
Lucky she said yes.
And now you've got James, a little 2-year-old boy.
Yeah, so we have a 2-year-old, and that, of course, changes things as well, in a big way. And so we used to go to a country for like 2 weeks and be traveling nonstop throughout the country, filming these different stories, trying to get 3 or 4 films per country. And after having James, we thought that's too much for a kid to go from hotel to hotel, and too much for us, frankly, to lug the crib and the blah, blah, blah. So we came up with the idea of spending 2 months in a place at a time. And so we go to a country or a region and get an Airbnb and just spend a chunk of time there. So there's familiarity for our son, and we have a chance to explore the place in a different way. And it's kind of a nice development from where we were before.
Yeah. Well, I have watched a number of your movies, as I said before, and read a number of your blog posts, and I find them to be really heartfelt. I really feel the connection to the people that you're filming. It seems to me that you guys are very connected to your own thoughts and your own inner selves, I would say, because it comes across in the movies very strongly to me, that you have a real strong respect and compassion for the people that you're talking to. But I don't think you can do that unless you've got a strong respect and compassion for yourselves. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I do feel that. The films are, a film is hopefully a reflection of the person, both who created it as well as the people who are being profiled. We highlight the beautiful things that we highlight the truest story that we think we can tell of that person, the best story that can be told of that person. And I don't know, I think, why we tell that is a combination, why we tell it that way is a combination of our past story, of how we were raised, of our relationship with each other, and what we each bring to it. So when the film started, they were much more about food, and Mira is a very empathetic and compassionate person who really loves people and listening to their story and getting to know them in a way that is probably more profound than myself. And that's really so a big part that she's played in, and is kind of transforming these films from being my more food and like factual and activist centric things to being more to this power of like the human connection,
It's very present.
I realize that I didn't answer your question very well, but that's the best way.
No, it's good. It's very present for me. I was just watching, your most recent films. I particularly enjoyed the movie about the McGrath family butcher. And
thanks.
And that's a bit funny because for the past 2 years I've been grappling and doing pretty well actually at trying to be vegan. And I saw in one of your posts, I think it was just in your about section on your website, that Mira became a vegetarian after filming the first episode. So I thought that was pretty funny. I was wondering what that first episode was about that prompted her to become, vegetarian, that prompted her to become vegetarian. What was that about?
The first episode was about Thanksgiving turkey. And so we brought a turkey home from an organic farm and had it in our backyard. And Amira, of course, thought I was a monster for killing it. And everybody has their sort of wake up point where they realize what they're doing has an impact on whatever it may be. And that happened to be hers, where she was, right. She knew that she had been eating animals, but it took like an animal in her backyard that she saw and loved to make her make that change.
Mm. I love that movie about the McGraths because it seemed to me that you guys really value tradition and people going about their lives in a humble way and sort of battling the times and grappling with life. And I also enjoyed the film about Barron's Bakery. It affected me in a similar way. I really loved Esther Barron. And again, I got this strong sense that you guys really valued tradition. And I guess, you were in Ireland, there's a lot of that there, but you didn't have to highlight that so strongly. And I get a sense it's important to you. Can you just touch on that for me?
Sure. First off, I do want to mention that we have another partner in our series, which is Hunter Johnson, who's right. a friend, and he came to Ireland with us and filmed and edited with us a lot of the films that were in Ireland, and is a very talented young man who I have to give props to for being a huge part of what we do now. But that aside, tradition, it's funny when you look up quotes about tradition online, it can be difficult to find positive ones. A lot of the discussion of tradition is quite negative, which I think is really fascinating. I think a lot of that comes from kind of some of the traditions around religion and that can keep women out of strong roles in society and so forth. That's what a lot comes up on tradition. But I think, and I totally agree with a lot of that, but a tradition around food can be quite an inspiring thing. And I don't think we should be going back to the way everything was, but I do think that there's constantly things to be learned from our past, and that when our society has gone so far in forms of industrialization and homogeny and so forth, it can be beautiful to look back at these bits of tradition that still exist.
I certainly found that.
Yeah, the way that they were. And they're not perfect and they can't be, replicated in quantity, but I do think it's important to celebrate those little things, and that they do provide a bit of inspiration for how our society today could learn from them and be a little bit different.
Yeah, I really loved how in Mira's blog about the McGrath butcher, she talks about how she went looking for blood pudding, and yet in the end, you guys found something completely different and a total absence of blood pudding. But you came up with, nonetheless, a fantastic story. These people invited you into their home and very short notice, and it was clear that you really connected with them. But I guess you have many such stories where some wonderful surprises unfold as you get into the project. I wanted to ask you, to share some more of those.
Yeah, sure. So a key part of what I think is the reason that we get to tell some good stories and our films end up seeming very real is that we don't have an agenda of what the story is going to be when we go and meet with people. We might have a vague idea of what it might be, but we really let the story tell itself. And because we're on the internet, there's no obligation to have a sort of set structure around the length of the film, the style of the film. And so it really liberates us to do things differently. And so when we go and film a story, if it doesn't match what we thought it was, it doesn't ruin it for us. We just go in a different direction, such as the case with the blood pudding and McGrath's. The example that I always like to give, because it really is the most truest version of it, is we were in Sri Lanka at an organic tea farm. We went to film this story. We thought it was going to be about the importance of organic and how, there's the tea industry has like really low wages and a lot of pesticides and blah, blah, blah. And we met with these farmers and they just didn't have that much to say about that topic. They weren't particularly passionate about or maybe eloquent about talking about tea. But we noticed that this husband and wife were they're an older couple and they were working together and they were very sweet with each other and smiley and kind of had a very warm relationship. And although we were talking through multiple translators into their local dialect, we were able to get the sense that they had this story to tell. And so we began asking questions about how they met, and they had an arranged marriage, but it was a very sweet story of their arranged marriage. And so we asked a bunch of questions and kind of thought we had an idea of what it was. And then when we came back home to edit, we got it all properly translated and made this story that was kind of a combination of their love story and the tea, facts about the tea. And there was a moment when we decided to take out everything about tea and just have it be the love story, because that was the best story. And it suddenly turned into what is one of maybe our favorite film that we've made, because it is about tea. If they're at a tea farm, they're picking tea, but there's no mention of it. Yet somehow this love story makes you get to know and connect with tea and tea farmers so much more than you ever would with any piece of information. And so that really changed the way we look at making these documentaries and how important that personal story and the best story that is there to tell.
I like it very much. And you've got to be open to what the world presents you. rather than going with a fixed view of what you're going to take from that place, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're listening to a Cooey podcast with Scott Poynton. Read about this episode and listen back to more Cooey podcasts at scottpoynton.com.
So look, this summer you've embarked on a new and different project. You're going back to Kickstarter for your Resistance Through Storytelling project. Now, you've just told a wonderful story about the tea family there in Sri Lanka. Tell us about your Resistance Through Storytelling project, mate.
Sure. As you know, we had a very contentious election this past November.
Somewhat stressful,
extremely stressful, and the results were shocking to a lot of Americans, and kind of thrown by the fact that this could have happened. And really changing a lot of our perspective on what it means to be an American. You know, America has a very complicated history, and we certainly have not been an innocent country in any way. But what appears to be currently going on just is unacceptable for us, regardless of all the things that our country has done in the past. And so I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people about, like, what can we do? You know. We have a president that we think is a horrible human being, to put frankly, who does not have the best interests of the country at heart, and especially not the best interests of the diversity of our country, which is something that I personally value about the United States. You know, is all of the different people that have come here over the years and continue to come here, and I feel very lucky to be born an American and realize that's an extreme privilege. You know, and to try to protect that privilege and not share that privilege seems like a crime. And so I, as a filmmaker, thought maybe there's something I can do about it. You know, our films are already, I think, strive to embrace diversity of the world and share different perspectives. But I felt like they might be reaching an audience that perhaps already thinks similarly to me. You know, the audience that we have, you know, it does reach a large group of people, but didn't want to preach to the choir.
Right.
And so began to think about how we could make an impact on people who are different than myself, who might have voted for Trump or might have not had the wonderful experiences that I have every day with recent immigrants to the United States.
People from all around the world.
Yeah, in Minnesota, we have the largest Somali population outside of Somalia, and obviously in all of the U.S., we have a large Latin American group of immigrants, and I live in a community where I'm surrounded by those people and have positive interactions with them every day. Mm-hmm. And so, but if you listen to Fox News or have a Facebook feed, there's a lot of negative stories out there about those same groups of people that, you know, there's negative stories about every group of people. We all have our goods and our bads, and you can choose to focus on those stories, or you can celebrate the goodness in a society. And so we wanted to find a way to get these stories that we were seeing, the people that we have met, in front of a different audience. And so we'd actually been experimenting a little bit with Facebook advertising for our films, just putting like $25-$50 behind a video and seeing if we can target it to a group of people that might be more interested in that. So like we did a film about surfing and farming in Ireland, but then we targeted that film towards surfers who might not see the Perennial Plate, to get more people to watch it and to get that interesting message, environmental message to this group of people. And we found it to be quite successful. It really, you can get into a new audience through Facebook advertising. And so we thought, why not apply that to a new set of films that really celebrate immigrants in the United States and their stories, and target it towards moderate conservatives, people who might be, swayable on seeing these issues a little differently. So we launched the Kickstarter campaign because we know how difficult it is to work with companies and organizations and raise money, and that can be a very long process. And we wanted to use their term, kickstart the project very quickly. And so we just did it. As is the key of most of these things, is just to start doing it,
Just start doing it. And how's it going? I mean, are you raising the funds you need? Are you starting to make the movies?
Well, so we gave ourselves 30 days, and we have 7 days to go. And we're at 41,000 of the 50,000. So we're in a very good place. Have a week left.
Brilliant.
A week left to raise the rest of that. And I think it'll come through. There tends to be a good push at the end of people realizing that they have to support you or it's going to fail. And so, because the way Kickstarter works is you don't get the money if you don't reach your goal.
Right.
Which really is great. It does make you strive for something higher and make sure you get there. So, it's going well. And assuming we succeed, we'll start researching the stories in a couple of weeks.
Well, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch on this question of politics, because in one of your blog posts just before the election, Trump in Ireland, you called it, one of your readers commented to say that she was disappointed that you had brought politics into your blog. And there was a little bit of backwards and forwards from some other readers, and pretty reasonable discussion. There was no, ranting or raving and things. But I was fascinated because you responded by saying that the very nature of your show is political, but that you were encouraging a politics of humanity and compassion and of care for the planet. Can you speak about that, this politics of humanity and compassion and of care for the planet? This seems very important to you. And as I said earlier, it comes across in your movies. Can you share that thinking with me? Sure.
I mean, I think that all of our films could be seen as political because they're celebrating a certain way of life that has a respect for the environment, that has respect for people. I mean, there's no way it should be considered political, I should say. But with the nature of politics today, it has been misconstrued as that, I think what we have seen in my lifetime, and it started certainly before that, is kind of the departure of remembering that we're all human, especially in business, that people don't stop and look at, in our case, who is growing their food, and develop that human connection. And that's really what the Perennial Plate was about, was tying it back to those things. And so people maybe watch the films and don't think that we're, I feel like I'm not explaining this very well.
You're not being overtly political, but you're trying to connect people back to where their food comes from. And the big disconnection with, people can wander into Walmart store and buy their food. And we have this problem here in Europe. People have got no idea. Kids think milk comes from a milk carton. They don't have a concept that there could be a cow attached to it somewhere else and how that cow is treated. So, but raising those questions, well, not necessarily raising those questions as such, but highlighting this fact for people. So, yeah, I can see that some people would see that as being political. And what are you trying to say? And sustainability. Oh, you're a you're a left greenie. What's going on? I don't see any of that coming through in the comments on your blog, but it is that sense of this connection to humanity, which I saw this in another one of your films. I watched the film about fly fishing on the Gunnison River. And what resonated with me about that film was that you weren't demonising anyone. You had these guys out there on the boat, and they were farmers too. They used water from the river for their fields. They spoke about how they found a big trout in one of their irrigation ditches. But they could speak about the dual issues of fishing and protecting the aquatic river ecosystem, but the need for farmers to irrigate their crops to grow food. And here they were in their flannel shirts, and in other parts, and I've seen this in the States, in my own experience in the States, in other parts, such folk could be mocked. They're just rural rednecks. But it didn't come across that way at all. You presented their humanity, and it reminded me of my own discussions with people from the forest industry, who more often than not they get attacked for destroying forests and all the terrible things that they do because trees get chopped down. It's a bit like the turkey, but usually my experience tells me that these people love forests and they like spending time in the forest. It doesn't mean that everything's great. Still some things need to be done differently perhaps. But it was very powerful for me how you presented these guys and how you highlighted through them the need for people to speak together to find solutions. And I wondered if that was, I saw this in some of your other movies. I wondered if this is one of the things that you're trying to achieve with your movies, to highlight this common ground, the complex nature of the challenges, and the need for people to come together to solve problems.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thanks for saying that. I think that a real essence of the project, first off, has always been not to be negative. There's enough films out there and enough projects out there that pinpoint all of the things that are wrong with the world. So first off, we wanted to celebrate things that were happening, not point out where they were wrong. That was important to us. I think people learn in different ways, and some people learn through those hard-hitting documentaries, and some people learn and change through something that maybe makes them think about something in a positive way. So that is something that we wanted to do, was not to be negative. And then through my experiences of traveling and meeting a lot of people, I am inspired by those who are actually working to get things done, and I totally realize that getting things done is very difficult, and it's never something where you get exactly what you want. You never get the perfect thing. Sure, it'd be great if we could protect every forest in the world, but we also use paper and need and have burned fires and need this stuff. So I think really embracing the balance and finding ways to work together and across divides is huge, and something that's really not working currently in our country with our government, but there are inspiring stories out there. And I was really taken also by those guys from that film, from Trout Unlimited, in that they were very undogmatic and realized that we have a lot in common, that the farmers and the fishermen can each have a portion of their goal that may not be the perfect one, but they both need to exist, and they both can help each other if they can find that way of working together. And I think that's really inspiring and really important. And yeah, with tree cutters, with chocolate producers, with coffee, there's negatives to everything, but there is also ways that we can make these things great. Unfortunately, right now in the US, we're really losing that. And I think not just in politics, but in everything, we're backing away from like the nuances and going towards these big things again, where we're fighting something huge and being on one side or the other.
It seems very polarized, a lot of tension in the discussions, and people just don't seem able to agree to sit down and have a chat to each other. They've got to be throwing rockets at each other.
Yeah, exactly. And so this, like the Kickstarter that we're doing, is, even though it is political, and we certainly tapped into people's political spirit and the polarizing nature of the country and the anger that many Democrats feel, that the nature of the project is one to create a balance and reach across the aisle with our stories and present them in a way that is not attacking and not offensive, but really like trying to show their common values.
The concept of inspirational, I mean, I did find that movie about the Trout Unlimited guys inspirational as well. It echoes a lot of the work that I do, trying to bring people together. But what I also love, and it is inspirational, at the end of each movie, you have a small quote, some powerful idea, some powerful sentiment, perhaps some poetry, but always something inspirational. And this really resonates with me, because a lot of times when I do a blog, I usually put a quote up front to start the blog. But I do believe these little quotes, these little poems, they help people connect with the essence of the story. Where does this use of poetry and inspirational quotes come for you? Where does it fit into your thinking? Can you share with me that, mate? Yeah,
so I think the purpose of it was, after you watch a film and you glean something from it, then to be given a little something else at the end that maybe shifts that slightly or highlights an aspect of the story that you didn't think about, or will make you remember something in particular about it. So I think these quotes from other people really are a way of finishing with a thought, and like leaving you with something that to think a little bit differently, if that makes sense.
It does.
I've always, quotes are a fun thing that I've loved since I was a kid. And so it's always like also enjoyable to go and revisit the film that you've made and kind of find you put your stamp on it, and then to find someone else's words that maybe celebrate what was told in the story is enjoyable to do.
It's like a little gold nugget at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Like it wraps it up.
Yep. I might have to move my quotes to the end in my blogs now. Daniel, appreciate so much you talking to me. It's been absolutely fascinating for me. I so hope that you reach your Kickstarter goal. I wish I could get this podcast out there in 2 days and help you. It won't be out before the end of your week. But certainly I'm going to be watching the results of it, the movies that you produce. I want to thank you for the movies that you have produced. I do think they're inspirational. I'll certainly do what I can to share them. And I absolutely wish you and Mira and your colleague, Hunter, I think what you three folks are doing is absolutely brilliant. So very inspirational. And you're bringing a voice to this polarised and very tense world that I think helps people come together. And I think we need more of that. So thanks again for your great work.
Thank you. And thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Good on you. You've been listening to Daniel Klein, The Human Connection, another CUI podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to Daniel as much as I did, and I encourage you to visit the Perennial Plate's website, which is www.theperennialplate.com, to watch for yourself some of their wonderful movies. And Daniel did indeed reach his Kickstarter campaign target, and I very much look forward to the new movies he and his team will create as a result. I'm Scott Poynton. Thanks for listening.